A puppy dragged a black bag to the hospital. Doctors froze. When they opened it and saw the truth, the wind screamed down from the mountains like a freight train, shoving snow in every direction, burying roads, fences, and memory. It was the kind of blizzard that made time stop, the kind you felt in your ribs and teeth. At the edge of the valley, the lights of Silver Ridge Community Hospital blinked like a dying star, barely visible through the thick curtain of white. Inside, the emergency room was running on backup power. Monitors beeped, nurses moved with muffled urgency under flickering fluorescent lights. It was Dr. Carson Mitchell's last night on shift, though you'd never guess it by how he moved. 65, tired around the edges, but sharp where it counted. He still wore the same frayed parka from the blizzard of '98. The staff had teased him earlier, but Carson just smiled and zipped it higher. He was old school, the kind of doctor who kept his stethoscope long after it cracked, who didn't believe in retiring until he had no choice. He stood at the nurse's station, reviewing labs by headlamp, when it happened. The automatic doors whooshed open with a metallic gasp, and the blizzard followed something in. Not someone. Something. A puppy. A German shepherd, young, no more than a year, but already big for his age. Snow caked his legs and underbelly. Blood, old and fresh, matted his left flank. His ears were pinned back, his breath ragged. He wasn't barking. He wasn't panicked. He was dragging something. A black duffel bag, the kind military medics carry, gripped tightly in his jaws. It looked heavy. Too heavy for a pup. But the dog hauled it across the slick tile floor, step by step, toward the reception desk, where every nurse had already frozen mid-motion. "What the hell?" murmured Amy, the triage nurse. Her coffee cup trembled. The shepherd stopped short of the desk. Blood dripped on the tile. Steam rose from his coat. His chest heaved. No collar, no leash. But a tactical vest, worn and shredded, hung loosely from his frame. Military issue. The dog didn't whine, didn't growl. He locked eyes with Carson. Intelligent, wild, pleading. Carson dropped the clipboard. "Don't move," he said quietly, holding up a hand as 2 security officers appeared behind him. "Everyone stay back." The dog took 1 step back, protectively nudging the duffel bag with his nose. One of the guards, a young guy named Drew, whispered, "You think it's a bomb?" Carson shook his head. "Look at him. He's not warning us. He's asking for help." The dog stepped forward again and gently dropped the bag at Carson's feet, then backed up and sat, trembling, waiting. Carson knelt slowly. Every joint in his body screamed, but he didn't notice. He kept his voice low. "Easy, boy. I'm not going to hurt it." He unzipped the bag and froze. Inside was a small bottle of insulin, cold but not yet frozen. Next to it, a sterile syringe. Beneath that, a child's medical bracelet, pink, with tiny unicorn stickers still intact. The name read, Lila, type 1 diabetic, insulin dependent. There was also a crumpled, blood-smeared piece of paper. A hand-drawn map. Lines and notations, messy but urgent. It showed the hospital, then a crude path leading into the foothills, past landmarks marked cabin and stream crossing. And at the bottom, scrawled in thick Sharpie, "She needs insulin. Kidnapped. Officer down. Follow Scout." Carson's heart kicked hard. "Scout," he said aloud. The dog's ears perked. Carson looked at him. "That's your name, isn't it?" Scout stood slowly, as if understanding. He limped closer to Carson and sat again, almost leaning into him. Drew had already radioed for backup. Naomi, the ER nurse, was snapping photos of the contents. Phones were out, internet down. Storm had killed the cell towers hours ago. Everything was relying on generators and offline intuition. Carson looked around the ER. Eyes were wide. No one spoke. Then the overhead lights flickered once, and died completely. Only the hum of the generators remained. Carson stood and turned to Naomi. His voice was steadier than he expected. "Get a glucose monitor and a trauma pack, now." She blinked. "You're going after her. She's running out of time." He looked down at Scout, whose tail wagged once, weakly, as if in agreement. Carson reached into the bag and found one more thing. A photo. A young woman and a girl, Lila, smiling in summer sun. Behind them, pine trees. Both were wearing matching pink jackets, the kind only kids pick out themselves. He turned the photo over. Another note. "She's 6. Please hurry." Carson felt the burn rise in his chest. Not fear, not adrenaline. Conviction. He looked around the room. "I'm not waiting for a rescue team. That dog didn't survive that storm just so we could stand here talking." Scout nudged the duffel bag toward him again. And Carson Mitchell, on the last night of his medical career, reached down, zipped it shut, and said, "Okay, Scout, let's go save a little girl." The emergency room had gone quiet after the storm swallowed the cell towers. Monitors still beeped, but softer now, like they knew something bigger was happening. Carson led Scout into a small supply room just off the trauma bay. The dog's paws left wet streaks on the linoleum, a breadcrumb trail of melted snow and faint blood. His breath fogged the cold air. He didn't whimper or pull away when Carson closed the door behind them. He simply sat, poised as if waiting for orders. Carson crouched beside him. "Scout," he said again, testing the name. The shepherd's ears flicked, his amber eyes meeting Carson's like an equal. "Okay, let's see what you've got." The tactical vest hanging off the dog was shredded but functional. Carson ran his fingers along the straps until he found a small camera clipped to the shoulder rig, its lens cracked but still blinking a red standby light. He unhooked it and connected it to an old laptop in the staff lounge. The hospital's internet was dead, but the laptop still had juice. Naomi slipped into the room carrying a towel. "You sure about this?" she whispered. "If it's police evidence, I'm sure," Carson said. "We don't have time to wait for protocol." He nodded at Scout. "Someone trained him to find us. Let's not waste it." Scout stayed perfectly still as Naomi dabbed at his flank with the towel. He winced, but didn't growl. His gaze never left Carson. The laptop chimed. The video opened. Snow, dark trees, the jitter of a chest camera moving fast. A flashlight beam swung across the ground, then steadied on a burned-out SUV half buried in drifts. A man's voice, breathing hard. "Dispatch, this is Officer Ramsey, approaching the vehicle now." Carson's stomach tightened. The voice had changed with age, deeper now, but it pulled him back to lecture halls and nervous young med students. Eli Ramsey. He'd been the kind of student who stayed after class to ask about ethics cases, who sent thank-you notes. Carson hadn't seen him in years. The footage jumped, a crunch in the snow. The beam swung again, revealing footprints circling the SUV. Then movement, someone stepping out from behind a tree, a flash of metal in their hand. The camera jerked violently. A shout. Snow flew past the lens as the officer went down. Another man's voice, cold, close. "You think you're saving her?" Then the sound of a struggle. Muffled cries. The camera tilted sideways, capturing a blur of boots dragging a woman and a child toward a cabin in the distance. The flashlight beam caught the child's face for a split second. Lila. Her lips were pale, her small hand clutching her stomach. "Scout!" Eli's voice, urgent now, off camera. "Get out! Find help! Go!" The lens caught a last image. Eli on his knees, hands bound, blood streaking his cheek. Then the feed cut to static. Carson closed the laptop slowly. His hands had gone cold. Naomi's eyes were wide. "That's your student?" she asked. "Was," Carson said. "He became a cop." Scout stepped forward then, placing one paw on Carson's knee. The movement was deliberate, almost human. His vest shifted and something clinked inside a pocket. Carson reached in and found a second memory card and a GPS tag blinking weakly. Battery low. Naomi leaned closer. If that's still transmitting, we can find them. Carson finished. He flipped the card over. A faint engraving on the plastic read, Unit K9 Scout Rescue Protocol. Not bomb squad. Not narcotics. Rescue. He looked at the shepherd, who watched him with steady patience. You've done this before, Carson murmured. You're not just a messenger. Scout wagged his tail once, slow, like a nod. A gust of wind slammed against the supply room window. The generator lights flickered. Naomi checked her watch. Storm's getting worse. If we're going out there, we go now, Carson said. He stood, the decision already made. His back ached, his knees complained, but he moved like a man years younger. He loaded the insulin and the syringe into a small trauma pack, added glucose gel and blankets. Naomi grabbed an emergency radio and flares. Carson, she said, this isn't your fight. He zipped the pack. It is if they're dying because no one listened. Scout shifted his weight, ready. His eyes glimmered like twin coals under the flickering light. Not scared. Focused. Carson slung the pack over his shoulder and opened the door. The hallway beyond was empty, except for the echo of the storm pressing against the building. He glanced down at Scout. Show me, he said simply. Scout trotted forward, his limp already fading as adrenaline took over. He paused at the end of the hall, looked back once to make sure they were following, then pushed through the crash bar with his shoulder. Snow knifed in through the open door. Naomi pulled up her hood. We're really doing this? Carson tightened the straps of the pack. We're really doing this. Outside, the storm swallowed their footprints as fast as they made them. Scout led, head low, nose cutting through the snow, tail a banner of determination. He wasn't just carrying out an order. He was taking them to a boy Carson once taught, to a child fighting for her life, to the truth buried under ice and silence. And for the first time that night, Carson felt something stronger than fear. He felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. By the time Carson and Naomi stepped outside, the snow was falling sideways. The parking lot had turned into a frozen wasteland, the ambulance bay almost invisible through the sheets of white. Scout stood near the edge of the building, tail low, head scanning the terrain. He looked back at them once, then turned toward the tree line beyond the lot, waiting. Carson adjusted the trauma pack over his shoulder and zipped his coat to the neck. If we wait for search and rescue, it'll be sunrise before they even get coordinates, he said. Naomi tightened her gloves, pulling a thermal scarf over her mouth. And if we go now and get lost? Carson nodded toward Scout. Then we follow the one who didn't. Naomi gave him a sharp look, but didn't argue. She was younger, faster, and a hell of a lot stronger than she looked. Years of competitive cross-country had made her as tough as the blizzard they were walking into. But this wasn't a race. It was a rescue. And Scout was their only guide. They moved quickly, sticking close to the hospital's service road before ducking into the forest at the base of the ridge. Scout led, ears pricked, nose twitching every few steps. He moved with eerie precision, occasionally pausing at forks in the trail, sniffing the wind, then turning decisively. Carson followed without hesitation. Naomi, trailing slightly behind, kept glancing at the hand-drawn map they'd pulled from the duffel. This map isn't exact, she muttered. Looks like a kid drew it. That's because it probably was, Carson said. But that dog isn't guessing. He knows. They trudged uphill for almost 30 minutes before the first break in the silence. Naomi stopped suddenly. Hold on. Do you hear that? Carson paused. Just wind, trees creaking under the weight of snow. Then, faintly, a high-pitched whine. Scout had stopped several feet ahead, his body low, tail rigid, his ears flattened. The sound came again, a distant mechanical buzz. Naomi squinted up toward the ridgeline. Snowmobile. Carson cursed under his breath. It's too fast to be rescue. Scout barked once. Sharp, a warning. Then he veered off the trail, diving into a shallow ravine covered in pine branches. Carson and Naomi followed, ducking beneath the canopy just as a snowmobile crested the trail above them. A figure in a dark parka rode alone, face obscured by a reflective visor. They slowed briefly at the fork in the trail, looked down into the trees, then accelerated and vanished over the hill. Naomi exhaled. Who the hell was that? Carson shook his head. Not here to help. Scout crawled out from under the branches, shook snow from his back, and waited for them to move again. His gaze didn't linger on the trail. He was already calculating the next path. They pushed on, deeper into the forest. The terrain got steeper, more unpredictable. Twice they had to use Naomi's climbing rope to descend short embankments. Scout never hesitated, even when the footing turned to ice. He would pause, assess, then leap or slide with instinctive grace. Carson couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just training. It was memory. The way Scout sniffed certain tree trunks, checked landmarks, corrected course. It was like he'd been here before. How does he know this? Naomi asked during a pause. She was panting slightly, but her tone was skeptical. He was there when it happened. Carson replied. He watched it unfold. He remembers. Naomi looked at him, snow clinging to her lashes. Dogs remember emotion, not geography. Maybe, Carson said, but this one remembers both. Scout barked again, short and insistent, then took off toward a slope that curved down into a narrow gorge. Naomi hesitated. That's not on the map. He doesn't care about the map, Carson said, already following. The wind howled through the gorge like a warning. Trees bent under the weight of the storm. Scout disappeared behind a thicket of fallen branches. When they caught up, he was standing beside something buried in snow. A tire. Carson brushed snow away, then froze. A vehicle, half submerged in the drift. Burned. The front end blackened, metal warped from fire. The same SUV from the video. Scout circled the wreck once, then trotted to a nearby tree. He scratched at the base, then barked twice. Naomi was already scanning the area with a flashlight. There's another trail here. It was narrow, almost hidden under snowdrifts, but it existed. Scout stood at its edge, waiting. Carson turned toward Naomi. You still think he's guessing? She didn't answer. They followed the hidden trail for another mile before the trees began to thin. The wind eased slightly. Scout stopped at a ridge and sat, staring down at a small clearing. At the center stood a cabin. Dark windows. No smoke, but a faint trail of footprints led from the door into the woods. Naomi knelt beside Scout, looking out over the clearing. If the girl's down there, we're already too late. Scout whined softly. Carson narrowed his eyes. No, not yet. He turned to Scout. What now? Scout stood, walked 10 feet along the ridge, stopped beside a tree, barked once. Naomi raised her flashlight, revealing a small hunting blind camouflaged in brush. Inside was a single thermos, still warm. Fresh footprints, and something else. A ripped page from a notebook, weighed down by a stone. On it, in jagged handwriting, "She needs another dose by morning." Scout sat beside the paper. His eyes never left Carson's. And for the first time since they left the hospital, Naomi said nothing. The wind had softened, but the cold bit deeper now. the kind that got into your teeth. They'd been moving for nearly 2 hours since they left the hunting blind. Carson could feel it in his joints, but Scout never slowed. His movements, once fluid and certain, had grown more abrupt. He kept stopping, doubling back, sniffing the same patch of snow 2-3 times. "He's hesitating," Naomi said quietly. "No," Carson replied. "He's disturbed." Scout barked sharply. A short, clipped sound. Not alarm, not a call, but something closer to frustration. He scratched at a snowbank beside a tree until his paw hit metal. Carson crouched and began clearing snow away. Headlights. They emerged slowly. First one, then the front grille, then the side panel emblazoned with the worn logo of the county sheriff's department. The SUV was half buried, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. Naomi circled the vehicle. "Driver's doors open." Blood smeared the inside handle. Carson looked at Scout. The dog was pacing now, ears twitching, breath coming faster. "Scout," he said gently. "What do you smell?" Scout froze. Then he lunged toward a tree line across the trail, nose down, tail rigid. Carson and Naomi followed. A narrow path wound between the trees, flanked by uneven, boot-sized impressions in the snow, some deeper than others. They moved fast now, crunching through the silence. Naomi reached into her coat and pulled out a small flashlight. She swept it across the trail. Blood. Small drops, spaced evenly. Someone had been moving, steadily, injured but not panicked. Then the trail ended, abruptly. Carson held up a hand. Scout stopped. Ahead, the snow dipped into a hollow, where the trees grew thicker. In the center was a burned-out fire pit. Around it, blankets, food wrappers, empty medical vials, and a photograph. Naomi picked it up, her breath catching in her throat. It was folded at the edges, water-stained. A girl, maybe 10, pale blonde hair, wide smile, insulin pump clipped to her waistband. On the back, a date. 8 years ago. Naomi didn't move. Carson glanced at her. "You know that face?" She nodded slowly. Her name was Claire. Scout was sniffing the edges of the clearing now, circling. His posture had shifted, less driven, more wary. Each paw step was measured. His tail hovered halfway down. Naomi swallowed. She was a patient at Silver Ridge. Came in with recurring diabetic ketoacidosis. The father, Derek Kincaid. He wasn't violent, but something about him always felt unstable, obsessive. He thought the system was out to get them, that the drug companies wanted her to die. "What happened?" Carson asked. "She crashed. We couldn't revive her." Her voice dropped. "Derek disappeared after that. Just walked out during the autopsy. No contact since." Carson looked around the clearing. "You think this is him?" Naomi nodded. Scout stopped near a cluster of low shrubs. He barked once, then backed away, growling low in his throat. Carson approached slowly. Hidden beneath the brush was a makeshift cache. Inside, 2 more syringes, a field dressing soaked in blood, a half-used insulin vial, and a hand-drawn journal page. The handwriting was jagged, manic. She didn't have to die. But now they'll understand. Let them feel what it's like. Scout snarled, a low, guttural sound that made the hair on Carson's neck stand. Naomi stood still, staring at the words. "This isn't about ransom," she said. "It never was." Carson nodded grimly. He's reliving it, using this girl, Lila, as a stand-in. And Eli, he was just in the way. Scout began circling again, his movements more urgent. Then he froze, facing northeast. He barked twice, loud and sharp. Naomi raised her flashlight. Another path. There was barely a trail, but Scout was already moving. No hesitation now. The doubt was gone. Whatever scent he had caught, it mattered. They followed him for almost a mile, weaving through tight pine corridors and frozen streams. The trees opened up just enough for moonlight to find them. Then Scout stopped again. In the clearing ahead was a rusted shack. The roof sagged under the weight of snow. One window was broken. A faint flicker of candlelight pulsed from inside. Scout crouched low, waited. Carson knelt beside him. "That it?" Scout didn't move. Naomi whispered, "We can't go in blind." "No," Carson said, "but we can go smart." They circled wide, downwind, approaching the shack from the rear. Through the window they saw shadows. One adult pacing, another smaller figure huddled on a cot. The child. Lila. Carson clenched his fists. She was barely conscious, curled into herself. Her skin looked grey, even in candlelight. Naomi whispered, "We don't have ours. She needs another dose now." Scout pressed against the doorframe, tail rigid, ears forward. Inside, a man's voice muttered, rhythmic and strange. A litany of blame. Naomi closed her eyes. "That's him, Derek." Carson felt a chill that had nothing to do with the snow. This wasn't a kidnapping. This was a ritual, an act of vengeance disguised as justice. He looked at Scout. The dog was shaking with tension but silent, watching, waiting for a sign. Carson whispered, "We're not losing this one." And Scout, steady as ever, stood up and moved to the door. The shack wasn't abandoned. Inside, candlelight flickered unevenly across the warped wood walls. The air hung thick with damp rot and something more acrid. Old sweat, iodine, maybe fear. From where they crouched outside the rear window, Carson and Naomi had a partial view into the single room. A wood-burning stove glowed low in the corner. A cot was shoved up against the far wall. On it, Lila lay curled on her side, barely moving, one arm stretched toward her mother, whose wrists were bound to the leg of a chair with duct tape. The woman's mouth was gagged, but her eyes told the whole story, pleading, desperate, locked onto her daughter. Her whole body shook with the effort not to scream. Naomi whispered, "She's crashing. See the twitching fingers?" Carson nodded grimly. "She's heading into hypoglycemia." "Minutes," Naomi said. 10, maybe 15 before she seizes." Inside, Derek Kincaid paced in small, erratic loops. His parka hung open, exposing a sweat-stained thermal shirt. His beard was patchy, wild, eyes sunken but sharp with adrenaline. He muttered under his breath, something rhythmic, almost rehearsed. Scout remained absolutely still at Carson's side, crouched low, tail stiff, eyes locked on the man inside. No growl, no bark, just calculation. Carson turned to Naomi. "We go in fast. Quiet. You get to Lila. I'll handle Kincaid." "Handle how?" she asked. "I'll figure it out." Naomi narrowed her eyes. "I'm not leaving you alone with him." Scout shifted slightly, the faintest growl rumbling in his chest. "No one's alone," Carson said. He glanced at the cabin's front corner, then back toward the rear. "There's a weak point in the siding. I'll draw him out. You go in through the side window. Dose Lila. Cut her mother loose." Naomi gave a tight nod, already reaching into the trauma pack for the insulin. Her hands moved fast, but steady. Scout moved with her. "No," Carson said softly. "He comes with me." Naomi hesitated, then looked at the dog. "Your call, soldier." Scout didn't blink. He simply stepped beside Carson. Ready, they circled wide to the front. Carson picked up a chunk of ice and hurled it against the siding. Inside, Derek froze. Then his voice rose, suddenly loud and sharp. "You think I don't know what this is? You think I didn't plan for interruptions?" Carson stepped into the faint glow of the window, just enough for a silhouette. "Derek," he said calmly. "My name is Dr. Carson Mitchell. I'm here for the girl." A pause. Then the door flew open. Kincaid appeared in the doorway, one hand behind his back. He squinted into the dark, then laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You?" he said. "You're part of it. You doctors, you people, you left us to rot." Carson didn't move. "I read Claire's chart. I saw the note you left. She begged me for help." Kincaid snapped. "And nobody listened. And now this one, this girl, they're just going to forget her too." "No," Carson said. "We didn't forget Claire, and we're not forgetting Lila." Behind him, a faint rustle told him Naomi was moving. "Good." Scout stood at his side, still but bristling. Kincaid stepped forward, the flicker of steel at his side, a hunting knife, not raised yet. "Just there." "Why'd you come?" Kincaid said. "To fix it? To play hero on your last shift?" "No," Carson said. "I came because she's still alive." Kincaid's jaw twitched. "She's just like Claire. She needs insulin, and no one brought it. So maybe now you'll all understand what it feels like to watch her fade." Carson took one small step forward. "We have the insulin, Derek. She doesn't have to die." Inside the cabin, Naomi worked fast. She climbed through the side window silently, crawled to the cot. The mother's eyes widened, but she stayed still. Naomi whispered as she pulled the cap from the syringe, already priming the insulin. "Hold on, sweetie. You're gonna be okay." Scout suddenly lunged forward, not at Kincaid, but between Carson and the doorway, blocking the line of sight. From inside, Derek heard the creak of the floorboards. He turned. "Stop!" he shouted. But it was too late. Naomi had already injected Lila's thigh. The child stirred, just slightly, her lips parting with a shallow breath. Kincaid's eyes went wide. "What did you do?" He turned toward the door, raising the knife. Scout moved first. Not barking, not snarling. He launched with practiced speed, jaws locking around Kincaid's arm before the blade could rise. The two went down hard in the snow. Carson dove forward, pulling Kincaid's other arm behind his back. The knife dropped. Blood smeared across the ice. But Kincaid didn't scream. He didn't fight. He just wept. "They didn't listen," he sobbed. "Nobody listened when she was dying." Carson gritted his teeth. "Then listen now. Lila's alive." Naomi appeared in the doorway, carrying Lila in her arms. The child was groggy but conscious, her color returning slowly. Scout released. Kincaid stepped back, chest heaving, blood on his muzzle. He didn't blink. He watched Lila, watched until her eyes fluttered open and locked on his. And in that instant, Scout wagged his tail. Just once. Then collapsed beside the cabin step, exhausted but standing guard. The snow fell softer now. The countdown had stopped. The moment Lila's eyes fluttered open and her fingers curled weakly against Naomi's jacket, Carson felt his chest unclench. Just for a second. A heartbeat of relief. But Scout didn't relax. The shepherd stood at the cabin door, tense, ears forward. His body buzzed with something primal. He looked past Naomi, past Lila, into the dark where the trees thickened behind the shack. Then he moved. Not toward the child. Not toward Carson. He darted around the corner of the cabin, vanishing into the woods like a shadow. Carson shouted after him, "Scout!" But the dog didn't slow. Naomi adjusted Lila's weight in her arms. "He's chasing something." Carson shook his head. "He's not chasing. He's buying us time." Naomi didn't argue. She turned and began climbing back up the ridge, carrying Lila close. Her mother followed, barefoot in the snow but too dazed to feel it. Carson waited only a moment before grabbing the trauma pack and running after them. 10 minutes later, they reached the trail junction. Carson helped Naomi wrap Lila in an emergency blanket, injecting a second dose of insulin. The girl's color continued to improve, her eyelids fluttering with brief moments of awareness. But Carson wasn't looking at her. His eyes were locked on the tree line below. Scout hadn't come back. He turned to Naomi. "Get her to the hospital. Follow the creek down, then veer east. The snowmobile path crosses that way." She looked at him like he'd lost it. "You're going back?" "There's someone else in those woods." Naomi hesitated. "You think Eli's alive?" Carson didn't answer. He didn't have to. She pressed a flare into his hand. "Don't do anything stupid." Too late. Then he was gone, retracing Scout's path through the forest. The storm had softened, but visibility was still low. Carson moved quickly, scanning the ground for tracks. Scout's paw prints zigzagged across the trail, then veered toward a low rise. Carson followed, heart pounding, flashlight barely piercing the fog of falling snow. And then, blood. A smear on a rock. Fresh, he pushed forward, passing a stand of pines until he saw it. A small structure, older than the cabin. Metal roof, nearly collapsed, walls patched with tarps and rusted sheet iron. A shed. Carson approached slowly. The door was ajar. Inside, a faint groan. He stepped in and immediately smelled blood and rot. Scout lay near the back wall, chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. His flank was torn open, blood soaking the snow beneath him. One eye was half closed, but when Carson entered, the dog lifted his head and growled. Not at Carson. At the man slumped behind a stack of crates. Eli Ramsey. Bound. Blooded. Face swollen, one eye completely shut. But alive. Carson rushed forward, cutting the zip ties from Eli's wrists. The young officer blinked at him, dazed. "Dr. Mitchell," he whispered. Carson nodded, checking his pulse. "You're going to be okay." Scout growled again. Carson turned. Derek Kincaid stood in the doorway. His face was twisted, jaw clenched, knife in one hand. He wasn't shouting now. He looked hollow, like something inside had gone quiet. "I told you to stay away," he said softly. "This wasn't for you." Carson stood between him and Eli. "You had your moment. You made your point. Let it go." Derek's hand tightened around the knife. Scout, despite the blood loss, forced himself to stand. He swayed but stayed up, placing himself between Derek and the others. Kincaid hesitated. Then something cracked, not loud but sudden. A branch behind him. He turned instinctively, and that's when Scout lunged, not for the throat, not for blood, but for the hand holding the knife. They collided in the doorway, Derek stumbling back as Scout clamped down on his wrist. The knife fell to the snow. Carson moved fast, kicking it away, then tackled Kincaid into the snow. The two struggled for a moment before Derek finally went still. "I never meant to hurt her," he whispered. "I just wanted you to feel what I felt." Carson looked down at him, breathless. "I do," he said, "but this isn't justice. It's a grave." Scout collapsed again, panting heavily. Carson turned to Eli. "Can you walk?" "Barely." Carson grabbed the flare from his coat and struck it. The red glow lit the snow in a wide halo. "Then let's get out of here." He lifted Scout carefully into his arms. The dog whimpered, barely conscious. But even then, as Carson staggered into the cold, Scout turned his head weakly toward the trail, toward the girl he'd saved, and then closed his eyes. The storm had gathered again, angrier than before. Wind whipped through the pines with a shrill moan, and thick flakes dropped like ash, coating everything in cold, white silence. Carson struggled through knee-deep snow, Scout cradled in his arms, every step heavier than the last. Behind him, Eli limped along, barely upright, clutching his side. Derek stumbled close behind, blood soaking through his jacket from where Scout had bitten into his arm. His face was pale, eyes vacant. But he didn't ask for help. Maybe he didn't think he deserved it. They were moving fast, not out of hope, but necessity. Scout was fading. Carson could feel it in the way the dog's weight shifted, more dead than alive now. His breath was shallow, his body limp, but his heart still beat beneath Carson's gloves. They crested a ridge and began the descent. The hospital was still over a mile out, and if the storm worsened, it might as well be on the moon. Naomi had gone ahead with Lila and her mother, hoping to flag down a snowmobile crew. That left Carson, Eli, and Derek together in a silence thicker than snow. Halfway down the slope, a low, cracking sound split the air. Carson stopped. The trees groaned above. Something shifted. A soft rumble, like an avalanche beginning its sentence. He turned his head and saw it. A large pine, loaded with wet snow, its base already split, tilting, right toward them. "Move!" Carson shouted, but his boot caught a root hidden under snow. He stumbled, one knee collapsing. He tried to shield Scout with his arms, twisting his body. Then a sudden shove, hard, unexpected. Derek had lunged forward, both arms slamming into Carson's chest, sending him tumbling sideways into the snowbank. Carson hit the ground hard, pain blooming in his ribs, but not crushed. The tree came down a split second later. With a deafening crack, it slammed into the exact spot Carson had stood, and directly onto Derek. The world froze for a moment, snow settled, wind paused. Carson crawled forward. The trunk had pinned Derek from the waist down. His eyes were open, blinking slowly. "You would have died," Derek rasped. Carson knelt beside him, stunned. "Why?" Derek gave a weak, twisted smile. "She doesn't deserve to lose another person today." Scout let out a faint sound, a whimper somewhere between pain and acknowledgement. His eyes fluttered, barely open. Carson pressed 2 fingers to Derek's neck. Still a pulse. Faint, but there. Eli dropped to his knees beside them, breathing hard. "We need to move now. We can't lift the tree," Carson said. "Then we dig." The 2 men clawed at the snow, carving a trench beside Derek's legs. The bark had split the snowbank, not snapped bone, but Derek had passed out from blood loss. They wrapped his torso in Carson's jacket, creating a sling, then hauled him free inch by inch. Scout whimpered again, his tail twitching faintly. "Hang on, boy," Carson whispered. "Just hold on." By the time they reached the lower trail, Naomi's flare was already burning red ahead. A snowmobile team had arrived, 2 medics in heavy jackets, loading Lila and her mother into the rescue sled. Naomi turned and froze at the sight of Carson, carrying Scout, his face cut and covered in snow. Behind him, Eli supported Derek's unconscious body. "You brought him?" Naomi asked, voice low. Carson nodded. "He saved my life." She looked from Carson to Derek, then to Scout. "Okay," she said finally. "Then we save his." Scout was laid gently onto a heated pad in the transport sled, an oxygen mask secured over his muzzle. Naomi climbed in beside him, applying pressure to the worst wound while whispering something only the dog could hear. Derek was strapped in next, an IV already running. Eli collapsed into the passenger seat, groaning but conscious. Carson sat beside Scout, one hand resting on the shepherd's side, feeling each rise and fall of breath. The engine roared. As they pulled away through the snow, Scout stirred. His paw twitched against Carson's hand. Not weak, not random. A squeeze. A promise. And then he drifted back into unconsciousness, riding through the storm he had led them into. And out of. Silver Ridge Hospital hummed with a strange quiet that only came after the storm. Outside, the world was still buried under white, but inside, fluorescent lights burned steadily again. Heaters hissed to life, and nurses moved through the halls with brisk, focused energy. The ER had turned into a makeshift triage center. Eli stabilized. Lila resting with an IV drip in her arm, her mother asleep beside her, one hand never leaving the girl's shoulder. Scout lay in the trauma bay under warming blankets, one leg bandaged, the gash on his flank cleaned and stitched. He was breathing on his own, but his eyes hadn't opened since the ride back. His heartbeat, though, was steady. Carson sat beside him, silent. Naomi stood near the window, arms crossed, watching snow slide down the glass. "He's still fighting," she said, not looking at Carson. "Whatever else happens, that dog didn't quit." Carson nodded. "He's more than a rescue unit. He's a survivor." In the ICU down the hall, Derek Kincaid lay sedated, his arm in a sling, head bandaged. But when the sedation wore off, he asked for Carson. Not a lawyer, not a chaplain, just Carson. The two men sat alone in a small consultation room, separated by an IV pole and a silence thick with things unsaid. Derek's voice was hoarse. "You probably think I'm insane." Carson didn't answer. Derek looked at the ceiling. "I tried everything for Claire. She kept getting worse, and no one would listen. They said I wasn't compliant, that I was overreacting. One doctor said she was faking it for attention." Carson sat straighter. "How old was she when she died?" 9, Derek said. "Same age as Lila." He shifted, wincing. "I submitted paperwork. There was a trial for an insulin stabilizer still in testing. I begged to get her on it. But the hospital turned it down, said there was no proof it would help, said I was projecting." Carson felt a chill move through him that had nothing to do with snow. "What was the trial's name?" Virilin 3. Carson's throat tightened. The name hit like a hammer. He'd sat on the ethics committee that year, one of the dozens of cases that had crossed his desk. It had been a Friday. A quick signature on a declination form. Not urgent. Not unusual. But it had sealed a little girl's fate. He swallowed hard. Derek turned his head toward him. "You were on that board, weren't you?" Carson nodded slowly. "Yes." The room felt smaller now. Derek blinked, eyes glassy. "You signed it." "I didn't know. I didn't know it was her. I didn't connect the name." "She died the next month," Derek said. "In the ER, alone. They wouldn't let me in until after." Silence. Then Carson leaned forward. "I'm sorry, that's not enough. I know that. But I need you to hear it." Derek looked at him for a long time, then said, "I didn't plan to hurt Lila. Not really. I just wanted someone to feel what I felt." Carson didn't justify or excuse. He just listened. Then he stood, ready to leave. Derek's voice followed him out the door. "That black bag, where did Scout get it?" Carson stopped. "What?" "The duffel," Derek said. "That wasn't mine. I packed food and tools, but that bag, Scout had it when he came to the hospital, right?" Carson's mind turned back. The way the dog had dragged it through the snow, the way he'd set it gently at Carson's feet. He walked quickly out of the room, down the hall to the locker area. The bag was still there, tucked under a bench, blood-stained but intact. He unzipped it slowly. Insulin. A glucose meter. The photo of Lila. But then something else. Carson pulled out a folded scarf, faded red and white, with stitching on the edge. 3 monogrammed initials, MRG, his chest locked. Margaret Rose Grant, his wife. She'd died of pancreatic cancer 8 years ago. The bag had been hers. One of the last things she used while volunteering in pediatrics, back when she trained therapy dogs at the hospital. When Scout was still a puppy. Carson sat down hard on the bench. He turned the scarf over. There was a note in her handwriting tucked inside the pocket. "For when the world forgets what kindness looks like, let a dog remind them." Scout had found the bag. Or maybe he'd remembered it. Carson stood and walked back to the trauma bay. Scout's eyes were still closed, but his ears flicked at the sound of his boots. Carson knelt beside him and placed the scarf gently beside the shepherd's muzzle. "You brought it back," he whispered. Scout didn't move, but Carson could have sworn he saw the tail twitch. Just once. Scout's breathing had grown shallow again. The veterinary team, brought in specially by Naomi through a local wildlife rehab center, had done everything they could. Sutures, blood transfusion, IV fluids, warming blankets, oxygen. But now it came down to one thing. Time. Carson sat beside him in silence, one hand resting gently on the shepherd's ribcage, feeling each fragile rise and fall. Scout hadn't opened his eyes since the previous night. The room around them was still, the kind of stillness that held its breath. Down the hall, the hospital was beginning to return to normal. Phones rang, footsteps echoed. Patients were being seen. But in this small room, an old storage closet they'd converted into an emergency canine bay, time didn't move the same. Naomi pushed the door open and stepped in quietly, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "He's stable, but—" "Barely," she said, offering Carson a cup. He didn't take his eyes off Scout. "I've seen patients come back from worse." She leaned against the doorframe. "You're not going anywhere, are you?" Carson gave a faint smile. "Wasn't planning on it." Naomi hesitated, then said, "I talked to the board, told them what happened, what you did. They're offering you a consulting role, senior medical advisor, training and mentoring, part-time, no night shifts." Carson looked up. "That's supposed to be a favor." "It's a job," Naomi said, "but also a place to keep doing what matters. You weren't meant to walk away, Carson." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at Scout, whose ear twitched faintly. "I'm not sure I deserve the credit," Carson said. "He was the one who wouldn't give up." Naomi crossed her arms. "You followed him into hell with nothing but a duffel bag and a flashlight. That counts for something." A knock came at the door. Eli leaned in, his face still bruised, one arm in a sling, but clearer-eyed than he'd been since arriving. "Hey," he said, voice low. "Can I come in?" Carson stepped aside. Eli knelt beside Scout, moving slowly. He placed one hand on the dog's paw and swallowed hard. "I remember you from the academy," he said. "You were just a pup. Too stubborn. Failed your first scent drill because you chased a squirrel." Scout didn't move. Eli's voice cracked. "But you remembered me. You came back. You came back for all of us." The room held its breath. Then, barely, a twitch in Scout's leg. Then another. And slowly, one eye opened. Just a sliver. Eli let out a quiet laugh. "Attaboy." Naomi stepped closer, checking the monitors. "Vitals are climbing," she said, almost disbelieving. "He heard you." Scout's tail moved. Barely. But it moved. Later that afternoon, in the admin wing, Carson stood by a window, watching the sun burn through thinning clouds. His coat hung loosely over one shoulder, stethoscope in his pocket, where it had always belonged. He turned as Olivia entered the room. Lila's mother looked different. Older, somehow. Not from age, but from the kind of transformation only trauma could carve. Her voice was steady. "I spoke with the district attorney," she said. "I asked them not to press charges." Carson blinked. "For Derek?" Olivia nodded. "He was broken, but he didn't kill anyone. He saved your life. He didn't try to run, and he loved his daughter. I saw it in his eyes." Carson was quiet for a long time. "You really think he can come back from this?" "I don't know," she said. "But I know what it's like to beg for help and be ignored. That kind of silence can twist anyone." He looked down at the coffee in his hand. "He's being transferred?" "A psychological care facility, not a prison. He'll get the help he needed years ago." Carson nodded slowly. Good. They stood there together for a moment. Then Olivia added, Lila's already asked if she can see Scout. He's not ready yet. She said she's not either, Olivia said. But when they both are, she'd like to say thank you. That night, Scout slept in a new room with soft lighting and warm blankets. Eli stopped in before going home. Naomi brought a toy shaped like a tiny medic's bag. Lila had written her name on the side of it in pink marker. Carson sat in the corner. He wasn't sure what tomorrow held, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't dread it. He looked at Scout. You brought us here, he said softly. All of us, across every broken trail. Scout's ears twitched, but he didn't stir. He didn't have to. The message had already been delivered, and everyone was still listening. 1 year later, the snow had melted into green again. The southern wing of Silver Ridge Hospital, once an unused outpatient annex, had been transformed. The sign outside read, Scout's Corner, Pediatric Resilience and Diabetic Support. Inside, laughter echoed through the halls, punctuated by the occasional bark. Carson stood by the window, arms crossed loosely over his chest, watching the kids through the glass. It was the end of a Thursday session, and the classroom floor was scattered with colored mats, measuring kits, toy insulin pens, and half-eaten granola bars. In the middle of it all, a girl in a purple hoodie sat with her arms wrapped tightly around a German shepherd whose tail thudded softly against the floor. Lila. She was taller now, healthier. Her cheeks were full again, and her smile came easier. Every week, she arrived early just to be the first to greet Scout. The other children had followed her lead. Scout wore a blue therapy vest with a small embroidered patch. Certified medical companion, trained by experience. His scar had healed, leaving a thin line across his flank that no one talked about, but everyone noticed. He didn't run as much these days. Age, trauma, maybe both. But when a child cried or panicked during blood tests, he was there, his head resting in their lap, that deep, steady presence that told them they weren't alone. Naomi entered the room behind Carson, holding a clipboard and 2 coffees. New kid coming in next week, she said. 7 years old, diagnosed last month, terrified of needles. Carson took the coffee and nodded. Scout'll get her through it. Naomi smiled. He always does. They stepped into the classroom just as Lila was explaining to a boy how to check his blood sugar using Scout's fake paw band. The boy was skeptical until Scout lifted his paw exactly as trained. The kids applauded. Lila beamed. Carson knelt beside the dog, scratching behind his ear. Still showing off, huh? Scout blinked slowly, then leaned his weight into Carson's leg. Later, after the kids had gone and the room was quiet, Carson sat on the bench outside the center, Scout at his feet. The sun dipped behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the pavement. The air smelled of pine and faint antiseptic. Lila ran up to them, Olivia trailing behind her. We made cookies, she announced, holding up a plastic container. Sugar-free, but I promise they don't taste like it. She offered one to Scout. He sniffed, then gently took it with his teeth and placed it on the bench beside Carson. Olivia smiled. Still a gentleman. Carson looked at her. How's she really doing? She has her bad days, Olivia said, lowering her voice. But she has this place now, and Scout, and you. Lila leaned over and whispered something into Scout's ear. He didn't move, but his eyes followed her as she skipped back toward the building. Olivia lingered. You know, I used to think what happened to us was cruel, random, but lately I wonder if it wasn't a message. Carson looked out at the mountains. No such thing as coincidence, just stories we haven't recognized yet. Olivia nodded. After they left, Carson sat quietly. He looked down at Scout, who had rested his head on Carson's boot, eyes half closed, tail barely twitching with the breeze. "You didn't just save a little girl," Carson murmured. "You gave her something to believe in. Gave all of us something." Scout didn't stir, but he didn't need to. The message had already been delivered, and this time, the world was listening. Carson reached into his pocket and pulled out the old scarf, Margaret's, the initials still clear. He tied it gently around Scout's vest. Then, with the last light spilling across the benches and the distant sounds of children playing behind him, he looked toward the camera crew Naomi had invited to document the center's first anniversary. They asked him if he wanted to say anything. He thought for a long moment. Then said, "There are no coincidences, just stories we haven't recognized yet." He glanced at Scout, then looked straight into the camera. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" If you believe dogs like Scout deserve to be remembered, support our channel, share their stories, honor their courage. This is the heart of the German Shepherd legacy.